Welcome to the TRXL podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. In this episode, I welcome Matt Goldsberry. Matt is a design technologist and director of D3 at HDR. He spent years helping teams move from clever scripts and isolated prototypes to durable, measurable improvements in project delivery, spanning computational design, data modeling, Revit governance, dashboards, and the responsible use of AI in practice. In this wide-ranging conversation, we explore how technology is transforming day-to-day project delivery in architectural practice at HDR. We discuss rethinking standards and templates as living products, capturing and reusing knowledge to stop reinventing the wheel, and the real change management work required to help busy teams adopt new tools. We also dive into which tools are genuinely helpful right now, how to pair them with firm data and quality assurance loops, and why adoption increases when we meet people where they are. As always, I highly recommend checking out the show notes for additional information and resources. You can find them directly in your podcast app if you are a paid supporter of Troxel Plus, or over at my website at trxl.co if you're a free member. Lastly, please help the podcast by sharing these episodes with your colleagues, commenting on and sharing my LinkedIn posts, or leaving a comment on YouTube to engage with me and the other listeners. This was a great and fairly long conversation, but I hope you enjoy it. So now, without further ado, I bring you Matt Goldsberry.
What we call computational design has really changed over the last 5 years. I remember posting job positions for computational design 5 years ago, and you wouldn't get very many applicants. Not that there wasn't an interest, it's just was kind of a more of a, a little bit more of a niche thing. But now, there's a lot more graduate programs that are available for students. It's just buildings in general are very complicated, and there's just so many different ways to approach it, from a computational design perspective. That's, there's more graduate programs, there's more interest in it overall, especially I think it's a great field out of school because you can really take on anything you want. If you want to be super technical and take on facades, there's lots of opportunities there. If you want to be, analytical and be on the kind of the programming front, way early on, there's tons of stuff there. There's lots of even ways to be part of, computational design and construction document phase with dashboarding and analytics and all that kind of stuff. So there's so many different kind of avenues to come at it before. And, especially more like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, is very much thought of as a support role for the designer. Like you're going to execute like a Grasshopper script. You're going to build out some sort of automated process. And that's all there was. Not necessarily that's all there was for computational design, but that was the common role of computational design. And now, it's kind of like going up more towards, kind of leadership of a project and how to just deal with all these different problems we have around data. Every project is so extremely different. There's so many different things to choose from. And so part of kind of the role that we're setting up at HDR is kind of the computational designer that can support projects, but also lead up projects as well from a data side.
Well, I haven't officially welcomed you to the show, but I feel like we've already started. So Matt, it's great. It's been a long time. We've been wanting to do this. I think that this beginning kind of just conversation that just seems a little bit random, but also about the industry is indicative of the kind of conversation we're going to have today. And this, I know you're game for that too. We're going to have a marathon conversation, right? But maybe you can start off with just kind of your story. I mean, you're based out of Omaha, Nebraska. You went to school with Nate Miller, who's a previous guest on the podcast several times. Of Nate Miller's from Proving Ground. He's the CEO and founder of that. And obviously, like there was kind of this. I don't know, there was something going on at the time when you were in school with Nate and others that it just really started to give a glimpse of what was possible with the things that you're talking about right now, computational design, and how far that's come in the last, I don't know how many years. I don't know if when you went to school, but I mean, it just seemed like that wasn't even a thing when I went to school, right? People were barely doing 3D modeling when I went to school. Obviously that just took off as well. And then there became kind of this nexus of designing scripts, applications, there's various levels to this inside to make the programs do what we needed them to do in AEC for whether it was a design challenge or whether it was a workflow process challenge, whether, there's a lot of different reasons why you might go after this kind of a thing. But let's hear your story of like the origin story of Matt
Yeah.
Goldsberry.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I was in school now. I mean, there's so much exciting work going on with all the stuff that's available. But, I started at University of Nebraska and, we were, I remember doing, I started off, hand drafting, and I still, there's still schools that still do, kind of a first year hand drafting, physical modeling stuff. But one
Sure.
interesting thing about my undergraduate degree is I started off at Nebraska with hand drafting. And then my last year, fourth year, I remember Marianne Ray from Studio Works did a lecture at University of Nebraska. And it was like the first time kind of seeing a lot of the progressive work at SciArc, and got really excited about the work going on at SciArc, and started talking to her after the lecture. And I was like, I want to come to SciArc. How do I do it? She's like, well, just send me an email, and I think you could probably come like next semester, which was like 3 weeks away.
It's a little different
It's a little
now,
different
right?
now.
I'm
And
sure. It's funny that you bring that up, though. I think it was fourth or fifth year of my undergraduate, which I don't have a graduate degree, but just for context. But Tom Main came and spoke to us, morphosist, right? But also heavily involved at SciArc, and just showing off what they were doing in their studio and the work that they had done with just 3D modeling, right? And rendering and visualization and things like that. Obviously, very complex projects, complex assemblies, complex geometry, lots of Boolean operations, right? Back in those days, for sure, to get the geometry that they were after. And none of it was really done. It was all just hard modeled. I mean, it was all like Formsy solids modeling. I don't even think it was Rhino back then. There was their main 3D guy. His first name was Cameron. I do not remember his last name, but I'm like, I have the Morphosis monograph like right over here from back in those days, and it just kind of blew my mind. And I was one of two students who was doing that kind of work, and it was just so inspirational as
yeah,
a student. And so for what you're talking about with the work that was going on at SciArc, it was very different than a lot of architecture schools
yeah, and I
back then.
remember showing up there. I
Still
drove like
is,
24 hours like to get to LA, and I just like my directions were to SciArc, like printed off like MapQuest style, and then just showed up
right?
there and was like, no idea what was going on there. And I remember the first thing I did when we into the school was figure out where I'm going to find somewhere to live. And so I went into the computer room to like search the web or something like that. But I go into
Ended up living
I
there.
go to the computer room, um, and people are working on these renderings, because that's like the height of Hernan Diaz.
Hernan, was it
So I
Hernan
remember,
Diaz? Yeah.
getting into the computer room, and there's all these students, from Hernan Diaz studio, and they're, doing these renderings, and they're all like the, Maya organic shapes, and just thinking, like,
Super blobby stuff done in
yeah,
Maya.
and I
Yeah.
just, 24 hours came from, doing physical models, like cutting, basswood and stuff like that. So it was quite shocking and extremely exciting at the time. Because all those tools. I mean, it was fun being at SciArc at that time for like my final semester. It was like, all those tools were coming from, animation and
The
yeah,
movie
movie
industry.
industry and
Yeah.
VFX. SciArc was kind of
Hmm.
known for,
Hmm.
and still do a little bit, but a lot of people that graduate there end up in VFX in the film industry. Um, but those tools, that was, um, that just got going because it was just in the 90s that, Maya became much more prevalent. And,
Yeah.
people like, Greg Lynn and Hernan Diaz were kind of some of the first generation of people like leveraging those tools for architecture.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, seeing all,
Yeah, and it had its own scripting language, right? It had the Mel scripting language, which made it so that you could get under the hood. I mean, obviously AutoCAD had Lisp routines and things like that before that, but it was all mostly 2D. Most people weren't doing a lot of 3D in AutoCAD. And then Maya came along from the film industry, but that scripting capability was a
Yeah.
huge deal.
And so that had a huge impact on me. I got, super interested in, and still have like an interest in VFX. I mean, I think it's a great industry to kind of look at to see where we're headed.
Mm-hmm.
And then, uh, fast forward a couple of years, I ended up going to UCLA for graduate work. And then there was one summer I worked for like a VFX studio. So it's always
cool.
kind of been there as a area of interest. There's one thing I love in VFX is like the level of customization with the tools that go on. There's always, every film, they're always building all their own tools. And so, especially for, as a crossover into architecture, I think that's how I've always kind of been a little bit more on the technical side of like, what tools to test and implement. Back then the big thing was just like, what rendering engine you're using, cause it was always like, 2-3 hours to do a single in.
Oh my gosh, do you remember when like global illumination became a thing? Like all of a sudden it was like, what's that? Oh my gosh, it looked so much more beautiful than ray tracing at the time, right? Because it had ambient occlusion and it like these really nice soft shadow buffers.
In order to understand all those
it was
settings, you'd have to read a book and you'd like
Yep.
this guy crazy amount of like settings to get like the best possible render.
Yep. Yeah. So what were some of the rendering applications back then that you remember?
So I was big into 3D Max at the time. And
what rendering engine was that using
I
at
think
the time?
that was the very
Do you
first,
remember the name
one of
of
the
it?
very first versions of V-Ray, but I can't remember now.
Okay.
But I also remember,
Because they had their own, what was it called? Mental Ray?
yeah,
I think
maybe
they
it
had
was
Mental
Mental Ray. I
back
can't
then.
remember now. Maxwell was one of my favorites when I got into like,
I loved
yeah,
Maxwell
UCLA.
Render.
It was like
Yep.
one of the first renderings that really had like a style to the render.
And what was cool about Maxwell was it was like coming at rendering from a photography point of view, right? It was like when the cameras had aperture and so you could control depth of field. And like this was when things were actually starting to get much more cinematic, photographic. The renderings took forever, right? Overnight, always. It took but they were gorgeous. I mean, that was and you had like material IDs even back then where you could pull a multi-layered, Photoshop style thing together and tweak the brightness and contrast on a certain material just by using selection sets inside of Photoshop to focus in on those and do interesting things because we all knew post-processing was the way to fix things, not to render it again back then. You didn't get instant renderings.
Yeah. Yeah. And the rendering stuff, it was, I mean, that was an exciting time. And now I almost feel like some of the, AI image generation and training models now, it kind of brings me back to doing those renderings back then. Cause now instead of like rendering settings, you're tweaking, training settings with the AI. And it's like, almost kind of like, full circle or the same amount of time and energy spent, perfecting your AI images. Like back when we did all spend 3 hours rendering a single image.
Yeah, now you're tweaking. Yeah, like you said, you're really getting under the hood and like the whole idea of kind of prompt engineering, but also training sets and what it needs to focus on, what it needs to not focus on. All of those things is really still behind the scenes kind of work under the
And
hood.
back then, people thought, I mean, renderings was kind of looked down upon. It's kind of like renderings were thought of as like kind of like cheating, the same way that people think like AI is cheating now. Renderings is the same thing. It was always like, no, and don't do the renderings. You should be doing, CAD work, but you should be focused just on doing like elevations or diagrams, and that like renderings was kind of like cheating, or it's like, if you do renderings, you should only do one. And so, but I remember being at, when
It's all you had time for.
But then I remember being at SciArc, and that was like the main thing. Like I remember,
was all about
Yeah.
the image.
Because I
Yeah.
remember Neil Benari that was his big thing was always like one big rendering um, for this to like one like huge rendering and really kind of pushing the digital he was big in the 90s, early 2000s before at SciArc and then also at UCLA. That kind of rendering, I mean, I always found it, exciting from a technical perspective. And so I think that's what kind of propelled me to eventually kind of learn Grasshopper because, when I first started my career at, worked for some smaller firms in Los Angeles. And then when I graduated HDR, I remember some early on tasks that were very typical as a architecture coordinator, which was, drawing parking lots and things like that. And so my only way of dealing with that was coming up with ways to automate it. And so that's I started using
Yeah.
Grasshopper and then, which I think is common for a lot of people to kind of start off, kind of using Grasshopper as like kind of basic automation tools. And then um, you can kind of take that analytical path. And so that's kind of what I ended up doing more for that. And then,
Yeah. Interesting. So you were in school in Nebraska with Nate of Proving Ground, right? And then you guys kind of he went to Seattle, I
yeah,
believe, right? He went to NBBJ. I don't know. Did he go to graduate school too? I don't. You don't need to tell Nate's story necessarily, but I'm just that your paths
yeah.
diverged, and then somehow they've came
Yeah,
back
he was
together
one
at
year
some
ahead of
point.
me. And so we were always, we actually ended up, because I think he worked for a firm in Los Angeles. So we ended up meeting up in Los Angeles
Okay.
so we're actually in Los Angeles at the same time because I was out there for 8 years or so when he was
Okay.
at MBBJ. And I actually ended up one year doing an internship in MBBJ when I was at UCLA. But yeah, I mean, it was a fun time to be out there doing that. And then, we had met then and then kind of coincidentally ended up meeting back in Omaha at the same time.
Interesting. Yeah, that's cool. It's also interesting to me to think about how much time we spent tinkering with settings, right? Like because back then, especially the early days of and for a long time, probably still V-Ray, right? How many settings were there? A
Yeah.
thousand, right? Maybe there was a, and you had to know the terminology, the vocabulary of what all those different things were, or you would learn by just trying different things out. Oh, that doesn't work, right? I don't, I gotta, you would try a lot of settings, and to the detriment of like actually becoming an architect, right? I think that's one of the things that we spent so much time learning to pilot the software that you only have the time you have, right? And so you can't spend it doing something else. And it's interesting, right? Because like you're still on this track of the digital side and supporting a firm and finding workflows and different process, defining them, right, for your workforce at the firm. And therefore you're not working on buildings necessarily. I mean, I don't know, you haven't told me yet, but to me there's you made those decisions early, but they ultimately led you somewhere that was different from like I think slightly before at least my time people went to school to become
Yeah.
architects, period, right? And then things started to open up and there were a lot more paths than the three they were telling us about in school because every professor that we had, that was what was available to them. They could have been one of three things: a designer, a project manager, or a technical architect. And like nobody went to school to become a CAD drafter. Nobody went to school to, at least universities, right? There were definitely trade, yeah, technical schools, trade school kind of things where people went to just do drafting. And those were like legit positions inside of firms, but they weren't architects, right? The architects were doing the redlining, they were doing the coordination, they were overseeing and orchestrating the project, like doing the detailing, doing the code research, all of those things. And it's interesting kind of how things just kind of exploded into all these different opportunities inside the
Yeah.
profession.
I mean, part of it, I mean, I don't think people talk about it enough is like the amount of services things that come up that clients request now that was different,
Mm,
in 20, 30 years ago. We support a lot of projects early on, master plans, and there's just so many different RFPs that come out that are so
Mm.
different. Anything from we do a lot of like what we call like living master plans. But the like facility
Mm.
assessments and programming, and then there's a lot of this stuff that's coming up post project. I'm still a little cautious around digital twins, but I call them the mini twins, where it's like you have a model and just a little bit of data. But there's a lot of like contracts that are coming up around that. So there's just so many different things to be involved with a project. I remember doing an internship. I did an internship my freshman year, or my freshman year or second year of undergrad, and it was for like a small kind of traditional firm. I don't even remember the name, but very traditional in terms of like um, doing red lines and then picking up those red lines. Like, very rigid process, which still how a lot of firms work now. But when if you go into school to be an architect, and I guess if you're like a small firm and you're doing houses, you can do a lot. You can do a couple of those a year. But if you work for a medium sized firm and you do like a medium sized building, like an apartment building or something like that, it's usually might even be just yourself as a project architect on that. You could end up working on that project for 2-3 years, and so
Yep.
there's no way you're going to be an expert on, early stage design tools if you use them for two
Right.
months every 3 years.
Yep. Right.
Um,
Yep. That's interesting to think about from like a licensing perspective too, right? There's this whole, subscription model SaaS thing that's prevalent in architecture and many industries. And it's like everybody wants to sell you these things that you're just going to use all the time, right?
yeah,
No, absolutely not. You're going to use it for a period and then you're going to move to the next stage and you're not going to touch that again for a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. If you're a small firm, you're absolutely right
yeah.
about
And I
that.
know you've talked about that with a number of people, just like the obviously the number of tools that we all use. And I mean,
Hmm.
the tough thing in architecture is like we need a lot of tools. I mean, when you onboard somebody, it's like you need all these tools, but a lot of times you just need them for, a day every couple months or something
Right.
like that. Um,
Right.
and it's tough to know all these tools to use all the time. But yeah, from a licensing standpoint, it's tough. Uh, but I mean, that's where like the curiosity. I mean, that's where going back to like the VFX. I mean, they kind of sit in a similar space. They use like tons of tools. There's pipelines. There's some places that they do an entire film, just one or two people, and then there's big production houses that have hundreds and hundreds of animators and uh, pipelines and
Very specific roles, right? There's people who do surfacing, there's people who do rendering or lighting, there's people who do, right? It's super specific because they have enough pipeline going, there's enough projects going on at the same time that they can, like Pixar, for example, right? If somebody is into lighting at Pixar, they do lighting on shorts, feature films, all they're constantly just looking for what's next in lighting, and they are a position in the company that is a specialist and they know everything there is to know about that one thing. But there's enough work to keep them busy doing that one thing all the time.
yeah. I mean, I love that example. I mean, I sometimes when I like to listen to, there's like some VFX podcasts I like to listen to because they're always talking about their process, and it's fun to learn about other people's process and other people in other industries. And
Yeah.
sometimes the animators are the ones, they're the people that come from like a background in like animation. Like they're the ones that do like a single, short film by themselves because they're the person that
Mhm.
can
Right.
kind of do it all. So I kind of see them equivalent sometimes to like a designer where you can kind of come at it with this mentality of like, oh yeah, I could do this whole thing myself. I could draw and design it.
I totally did that because when I was after I graduated college, I was still interning. I became an employee at the firm that I was interning for. And then after a couple of years, I left and I just pursued doing visual effects, motion graphics, animation, things like that on my own. And I had to do all of it, right? And so I was constantly looking into tools, figuring out the best After Effects plugin to accomplish this certain task. Like learning a little bit of scripting to accomplish certain things that you couldn't do any other way. And obviously, not as many tools back then, but also a way higher barrier to entry because everything was so nerdy, right? Like you had to really dig into that stuff, but you also had to be really self-sufficient and manage your own render farm. And, it was like you had to do all the IT and you had to do all the design work and production and the finishing and all of those things together as a small, one person
Yeah.
studio, one person shop. But yeah, that's not too different than just being a small architecture
Have you ever
practice.
seen the film, what's it, the Pixar story, the documentary on Pixar?
Oh yeah,
It wa-
for
That's
sure.
like one of my
Yeah.
favorite documentaries for like, and just thinking about like the tools that we create. Because remember Ed Catmull, like they built, it was like the first, some of the first technology for rendering and creating a piece of geometry.
And subdivision surfaces, right? The Catmull
Camera.
Clark, all the NURBs, like the super early stuff. Yeah,
But I can't
super
imagine
cool.
that
Yeah.
super early stuff. I can't imagine like, it's like just a terrible rendering, and it took him, 5 hours, and
Right.
to build that and think like, this is going to be the future of filmmaking. Like, there's just no way.
So painful. It's so painful to go back and watch like the true pioneering work that they did. Yeah.
And then, because I think about that now too, and it's like there's still like you show people, some of the amazing, um, whatever automation, knowledge or image generation from AI, and be something just amazing to see done in super fast, and you know, people will still be like, no, there's no way that's going to work. Or
Totally. One of my favorite examples of that is kind of related is like 3D printing.
yeah,
It's like it's magic, and at the same time, somebody is complaining why is it taking so long, right?
yeah, 3D printing never really
What do you
took.
mean? It's happening overnight. You come in and there's a model, like it's total magic. Well, yeah, but why does it take 12
Yeah,
hours, right?
3D printing never. I mean, we still use it, but we always had that thought of like everyone's going to have their 3D printer, and print all the time.
Yep.
I think on 3D printing, it was always like the hang up was like you still have to make the model just for 3D printing. I mean, there's definitely tools to automate
Yes.
it and help close up surfaces, but there's still the task of, you have a Revit or Rhino model, and in order to 3D print it, you have to spend a bunch of time remodeling it.
Yep. Or well, and people think, well, it's just like hitting print. Like the problem is that it's called printing, right? Because people think, well, what you see is what you get. You send the document to print and there it goes. No, it's like overhangs, orientation, maybe it's multiple pieces together because support material. It's this whole other specialty of just learning how to model for 3D printing. Like, yes, Rhino finally came out with the shrink wrap tool in like what, 2 or 3 years ago? I don't know. It's recent and it's great for that kind of a thing, but it still isn't a 3D printing ready model. Like you might still have to put in bevels to support those overhangs so that you don't have to print with support material, et cetera. Like and obviously problems happen. You get a spaghetti print one day and it's like, well, throw that away, start over again, figure out what happened but yeah, it is interesting that it never really caught on because the automation side of what you see is what you get never really happened when it comes to that.
Yeah. Yeah. This summer we did this summer, one of the summer intern projects, this summer is we build like a physical UI. So we took this old, it's like a TI 99. I don't know if you remember that computer. It's from like
Oh my gosh,
Texas,
yeah.
Texas
Yeah.
Instrument from 1979. And we actually bought it at a Goodwill, uh, just like sitting on a bottom.
That's a good
Yeah, it was a
find.
great find. Because we knew we wanted to build something, and we're like, we could buy something that we know would work, like a Commodore or something like that. And we're like, all right, let's go to Goodwill and just see what we could find. And so we found a TI 99, and we plugged it in. It just started working. It was working just how it did from
Nice.
50 years later, and it still works. And bought like a Pac-Man game to work with it. But we ended up taking apart this
Wow.
whole
So
thing.
cool.
One of the premise of the project is we wanted to uh, the all the AI coding models getting so much better. We wanted to you know spin up all these applications just as a like an iterative process. So we were building like one application every week, and part of this application had a web application, but we wanted to build a physical hardware component to go with it. So you have like buttons and knobs. So we cut out a section of the computer, and we printed like all these like knobs and buttons. And so as like a physical UI, you could interact with this thing by the controller, and then you like hit these buttons and knobs, and you like generate a rendering, and you could build these little blocks on the screen. But it's fun
Cool.
to make something physical, even though
Yeah.
you're still, all the stuff we're building all the time is digital, and we're focused on the.
And yet, like, it's so ironic coming from an architect, right? It's like you build. It's interesting though, as you were talking about this, like rethinking the UI of buildings. How often does that happen? It doesn't happen that much, especially like commercial architecture. Your clients aren't asking for new ways to interact with getting up a level, for example, or building entry. Like everybody just accepts that it's the way that we've always done it, right? You've got this set of doors that you go in and then you walk up these stairs or you take the elevator or whatever. I mean, it would be difficult to change a lot of these paradigms. But at the same time, like creating a building, like a lobby, your first touch experience with the project, like it's
Yeah.
UI, it's user interface for the building. It's very interesting to kind of think through what that means and how that could
Yeah, I
possibly
mean, we
change.
didn't go there with any of those ideas, but that's an interesting idea. One like I was mentioning this summer, so we had these interns, and so we would every week the goal was to build a new application every single week, and so we were like iterating on all this stuff. And then the last one was this computer where we built a physical device, and definitely got us thinking about just because we're the digital team, computational design team, and we're building digital tools doesn't mean we can't be still building physical items, and it could
Yeah.
be
Hmm.
physical things for tools, but it could also be physical things for buildings as well that relate.
You guys still do laser cutting
Yeah,
too?
this last year we built a physical model studio in our Omaha studio. So we have a laser cutter, CNC machine, 3D printer, multiple 3D
Nice.
printers.
Do those things get much use? I mean, I imagine it's like depends on the project but because a lot of it's so interesting, right? It's like you could have a 3D printer, you could have a laser cutter, and they could just be doing the thing all the time. But that's not the case. Like that's not really what happens with these tools. They sit around empty, not being used most of the time. And then it's like, oh, I need to use this, and I can't even remember how to use it.
Yeah.
Like, what's the process for preparing a file for the laser cutter, for
Yeah,
example?
that one's an ongoing battle. I mean, we definitely build stuff in our Omaha uh, model shop, but we have a model shop in our Princeton office that's actually that's led by a person that's their main focus is to build physical models. And so
Mhm.
that shop gets used, 24 hours a day because they're always building
So yeah, they're like a
their
service
equipment. Yeah.
provider inside your own firm that does that thing. And so because they're accessible to all your teams, I'm sure they
But
have
yeah, I mean,
a
most,
workbook full of.
physical modeling does require like a flow of, interns around that can, spend the time and the focus to build it. Uh, I'm okay. Physical models I think are great. It's tough. Like if you do like a full scale, huge model, wood model, big base, like that's a level of model that really takes, craftsmanship and expertise. But I think anyone could easily do a quick laser cut of a site and do a 3D print of a site. And I find that quite helpful for project teams, especially for, pursuits and stuff to just do a quick 3D print. It's not that much time. Uh, but yeah, once you get to CNC milling and all that, it becomes a different scale. It needs to be built out as a service and tracked.
Yeah. Can you talk about like that value that you see in those kinds of output?
Physical models.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've always leaned more on um, like digital output. Physical models is
sure.
we we as in like the industry architecture. It's always like physical models has been something that, we've had, for centuries.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and so we've always,
It was visualization before there was computer visualization or even rendering, right? It was like that was a main communication
yeah.
device.
And that was always one thing I learned a lot about at SciArc. When I remember getting this SciArc, it was like, not everyone would have physical models. So it wasn't just this kind of accepted notion that no matter what, for as long as I remember, every project you're gonna have a physical model because that's just what we do as architects. We build physical models.
Yep, absolutely.
But yeah,
Right.
if you go to those schools now, like the more progressive schools, like SciArc and Bartlett, they're all like interactive, video, like film level style videos. Some of them do models, but it's not like these places are anti-physical model, but they're definitely like serving a different kind of purpose as part of the process.
Hmm.
So we've been advocating for more interactive, because we're not always the ones like building the physical model, so we're always advocating for interactive deliverables. So like we've been like spinning up these like interactive viewers, like via kind of vibe coding with Cursor and other tools, which are great because it's kind of like a physical model in a sense. It's like a throwaway object, an interactive page if you spin
Hmm.
it up with.
But what does that mean, interactive? Like what is the output here, and what is the bridge to the client that they're using?
Yeah. So normally, years ago you'd have. So what one big thing we do on our team is we build a lot of like Power BI dashboards. Like Power BI is a great platform
Okay.
for building.
Hmm. Okay, so interactive.
Yeah.
I get it.
But
Okay.
so we've been doing that we've been building Power BI dashboards for like 10 years now, like a long time. We have like custom viewers we've built and custom charts. And we have a whole like pipeline of creating these for all different kinds of phases of the project. Like master plans is a big one. You got tons of buildings. You want to isolate it. Um,
Right.
but we've been looking,
You want to drill
yeah.
down.
And we've always been looking.
There's a lot of
Yeah, a
drilling
lot of
down.
drilling down, and it's great for that stuff because if a client on a master plan is you got millions of square feet, you want to be able to like hit this
Yeah.
department, this building, this level, and all of a sudden it's dialed down to 5 rooms, and I can see exactly how big they are. So the 3D viewers that we build is like a big thing that we're always thinking about. We have some like custom ones we've built, like leveraging Autodesk Forge. We've said the custom ones with Power BI. We've been experimenting recently, kind of just building up our own custom web pages that have 3D viewers on them, and you can spin these up with tools like Cursor, but just ChatGPT 5, Claude Code, like any of these kind of agent mode code tools. You can just spin up your own
Hmm.
viewer and create charts, and you can import your model and interact with it. So it's a really great way to just create very interactive models, and then you just can publish it as a link, and then send it to the client. So
Nice.
so we've been building a lot of those. So I find that as like, to me, that's like kind of the equivalent of like a physical model in the digital space, because in an interview, the client wants, they want to be able to take the physical model and rotate it around. And we find the same thing with like a custom, you know, interactive kind of web page experience where you create all these filters. They can spin around the model. They can filter to, the podium level. You can have, certain analytical takes on it, whether it's KPUs or square footage or cost or whatever it is. And then they have a nice experience. It's all about, designing the UI at that point, the same way we design a physical model to look nice. You want the UI to look nice.
Yeah. Hey everyone, let's take a quick break from the conversation to pay some bills around here. This episode of TRXL is brought to you by TRXL Plus members. That's right, my incredible paid supporter members are making this episode possible. Their direct support ensures that I can continue exploring the intersection of architecture, technology, and the future of design with the leading voices in our industry directly to you. So let's talk about why you might consider financially supporting the podcast too. By becoming a TRXL Plus supporter, you're not just helping sustain these conversations, you're also gaining exclusive benefits like ad-free episodes of the show and my Leadership Edge email newsletter, where I analyze episodes and deliver the insights and key takeaways right into your inbox. Your small contribution makes a huge impact. And if you've been enjoying TRXL and want to be part of the community that keeps it thriving, please consider joining today. Head on over to trxl.co and click the subscribe button either in the upper right-hand corner or at the bottom of the page, or you can visit a link that I've put into the show notes. Once again, my sincerest thanks to the TRXL Plus members who have made this episode of the podcast possible, even though they aren't even hearing this ad because theirs are ad-free. Now, let's get back to the conversation. The thing that I recently kind of is rekindled, I was in I think it was at the AIA conference. Yeah, it was in Boston. And I went to a seminar there that had, table discussions. And one of the questions, I think it was around physical models, or I'm trying to remember if that was actually it. But anyway, one of the insights that was shared by one of the people at the table I was sitting at was that a physical model was the fastest way to build trust with a client, bar none. And it was very small, single person practice. And for them, that was the tool that built trust with a client faster than anything else. Like as far as like what you're capable of and what you're, how good of an architect are you? Can you solve our problem? Because there's a lot of, I think a lot of clients are like really like they're spending their life savings on hiring an architect, and you need to trust that architect that they're actually going to be able to do the thing. Of course, that architect has done it many times over, but never for you, right, as the client. And so as soon as they would hand them a physical model, it was like instant trust. And I wonder if you kind of see it like that with these kinds of tools that you're building, because it gives the client the ability to look at what they want to look at. And it builds credibility because you're sharing real project data that they get to, they listen to us. Here's our department, right? And our department has everything that we asked for, kind of a thing. Or at least we can now raise our hand and say, hey, I'm not seeing this thing that we talked about. Where is it? But it gives them a way to actually focus on these other areas that say, they're taking care of us.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the feedback that we've had on the dashboards that we've been building. Because the thing is on the client side, traditionally how we deliver this information to clients. I mean, neural boards and that kind of stuff has helped out a lot. But these projects they start off extremely complicated. Even though we try to make them as simple as possible, and even if you're just basic, blocks, as soon as you get into the scenario of like, say you got 3 blocks that represent the different parts of the building. As soon as like the client is like, okay, well, we have this other portion of the site, we want to test an option, or, we want to leverage part of that site. And all of a sudden, 3 options multiplies by 3. So then you get like 9 options.
You have a matrix
and
of
that's
options.
Just like,
yes.
And that's just at the level of like 3 boxes. So you just so quickly get to scenarios where, the client wants to play these things out, and it's helpful. I mean, that's ultimately what you want to do early on, is play out all these scenarios so the client knows exactly what they're getting, down to the number of.
Well, they want to know that they've exhausted the possibilities, right? Because a lot of times they don't even know what the possibilities are. I can't tell you how many times a client was like, we never thought of this. The final solution was something that was not even something we came to you with as a requirement, and through the process figured out what the project was actually about. And that's the kind of the unsung side of architecture, right? People see the final product, but they don't see the process that it took to get there. And the process is never linear, right? And so this matrix of options and dependencies between options, like, oh, you pick this thing here. Well, that has, ramifications for this other decision that we made, and now we have to solve that problem too. Or it made this decision easier when you chose that option, right? There's so many weird, like circuitous
Yeah. And,
pathways
one of the things,
from beginning to end of
because
a
we've been
project.
building these for so long, and the thing that really kind of clicked for us was like when you can build these, in a day, in a week, because the client on a project, the focus is changing every single week. So one week it might be, how many
Yep.
parking stalls can we fit on the site? The next is, do we need a tunnel or do we need a bridge? And then the next week it's like, figure out the project's over budget, how can we optimize the facade, classic one. And
Yeah.
so you have to be able to shift between all these very quickly. And it's all about, whether the project's in Revit or still in Rhino, is how can you, simplify the geometry and the data and quickly get it into, a
Yeah.
dashboard or some kind of viewer so that,
Too much detail is detrimental, right? Because you can't, you'll break something, right? So you have to keep it lightweight so that you can make those decisions. It's
yeah, and
interesting. Yeah.
it's a tough one. I mean, we have so many scripts that are about, taking Revit projects, because a lot of times we're always pushing to take it out of Revit into Rhino. Not the whole team needs to take it out of Revit, but just in order to get back to trying to solve what the client is interested in solving, we have to get it back in Rhino and just simplify it back to boxes. So if we're going to, if the
Yeah.
project is over budget, we need to figure out if are we going to take a level off? Are we going to make it shorter and one?
How many boxes are we deleting? Yes, right.
In any kind of doing any of those kind of operations inside the Revit environment is so painful.
Yeah.
And it's not what it was designed to do. So, nor should it.
Right.
But you have to be, willing to quickly make the jump to say, it's okay. We're just going to import that, we're going to use Rhino inside. We're going to bring it into Rhino. We know we're going to pull this type of geometry. We're going to relabel it. We're going to color code it in Rhino. And then we're going to have all our quantities. And then we're going to, spin it up into, heads up display or Power BI dashboard. So that's kind of a lot of like what we do on projects and how we support project teams.
Yeah. Well, you're in a big firm. I would imagine that you have
Yeah.
advocates. I'm saying that with a smile, who are say, "Oh, why don't we just do it all in Revit? Why don't we just do the whole
My
thing
favorite
from?"
conversation.
And to the point that you just made is like, well, it's obvious once you kind of actually play that out. But I find it curious that that conversation keeps coming up. It's like, and it's something that firms are constantly dealing with. It's like you have to zoom out and then you have to zoom in, and then you have to zoom out and then you have to zoom in because it's about decision making, right? And I think, with clients that I've worked with, like they want to see the end from the very beginning. And architects are extremely comfortable with not knowing where the end is, but knowing that we'll get there. And there's this process we have to go through. That is a really hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. And even for many people inside a firm, still, it's a hard pill to swallow. It's like, well, there's one answer. No, there isn't. There's a lot of possibilities. We will eventually get to one answer, right? Which is the building that gets built, but we have to figure out how we're going to get there. And as we go, this decision changes that decision, changes that decision, changes that one. And that is what a project is like. But people forget that. I don't know. And I don't know why they forget that, but I bet you see all versions
Yeah.
of that in a firm the size of
Yeah. I
HDR.
mean, I've been advocating for years the concept of like, because we have like a tool we built in Rhino that assigns data to objects. And so I've always been a huge advocate of like simple geometry, tons of data. And you can accomplish so much, when you're working on a, say a plan of some sort, an office plan, in order to make decisions for the team or for the client, they don't need to see all the tables and chairs. They just need to know, how much, space they're using. And then it gets broken out, 20 different ways. And there's like, you have room square footage and department square footage and building gross factoring numbers and all that kind of stuff. And you need to be able to work fast enough. The goal is always to be able to, in a live workshop or a meeting with a client that you can sit there and model and make changes to the model fast enough that, we can play out.
Real-time
Yeah.
decision making.
If the
Yeah.
client is like, what if we did this, that you can just do that. It's not that,
And not say, oh, we'll take that back and study it and come back in 2 weeks and delay this decision for X amount
yeah.
of, yeah,
And so
absolutely.
speed is like, I'm always thinking about, anytime like a new tool comes online, I'm always thinking about um, how it can make people work faster. And it's not necessarily like, I always think speed is an interesting concept for architects, because we're always like, anytime people think of like automation and speed, they immediately think like it's going to cut out project hours. And it's like, I'm
Uh-huh.
always advocating for, it's not, we're not going to cut out project hours. The goal is that we can focus on, you know, it, we always run out of hours on every project because there's just,
You use them
there's,
all. Yeah. The goal is to use all the hours, spend all the money, right? And hopefully not go over though, right? Like that. Yeah.
and if you can get, if everyone on the project team and the client understands, the solution that is being proposed and everyone's on board and agree with it, then that's what, ultimately you're trying to solve. But, um, yeah, I mean, just being able to work extremely quickly and then disseminate that information to the rest of the team. I mean, that's how people don't talk about how effective like Mural has been for project teams in terms of like saving hours for a project. Like pre-company.
Talk about that. I want to know. I want to know what you mean by that. So first of all, explain for people who've never used Miro, what is it and why is it so effective?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine everyone's like interacted with it at some point, but like an online web whiteboarding surface, whiteboarding or a pinup space. So I was whiteboarding
Hmm.
is that's a Microsoft has one called whiteboarding. Miro, Miro is probably the most popular, but there's many of them out there.
There's Mural.
Mural, yeah,
Yeah.
digital
Yeah.
pinup space, and none of these existed pre-COVID. When they existed, they just probably weren't very popular.
And they just didn't need to be used because you were in the office and you had a wall, right? That's
Yeah.
what you used. Yeah.
And then during COVID, we started using these pinup spaces because that's the only tool there was really available to get stuff out there that everyone could see. Um, and almost to the point now where I'm like a Miro like fanatic. I can put my to-do lists in Miro.
You're a Miroholic. Yeah.
I think people on my team are probably like how many Miro boards is this guy gonna spin up? Um, but I find it,
So that's your
yeah, it is.
go-to.
Well, I mean, it's kind of
That's your
like
go-to like
that's
brainstorming
how like
app.
designers and architects think is like just visually, screenshots on a board. You can spin around it, move
Move
stuff
stuff
around, see
around.
it.
Yeah.
But in terms of like productivity, like nobody talks about Miro as like a productivity tool. But for any
Mm.
tool out there in the AC industry that saved us hours, like that tool saves huge, massive amounts of hours that nobody talks about because
Well, it's funny that is an interesting mindset to have about it. I totally agree with you, but like you could also make the case for real-time rendering. Remember when rendering took 12 hours? Like we talked
yeah,
about it, right? With Maxwell Render and whatever. And now it's like a real-time decision-making engine, but people don't talk about it as a productivity tool. I mean, a lot of people waste a lot of time in it too, honestly, right? Because you're endless iterations now that used to you would just do all the thinking and then you would spit out the final answer. It's not like that anymore. But to your point, like this is how architects have always worked. This is the new version of trace paper, right, on a desk, and just everybody's got a fat pen and they're going
yeah,
at it.
yeah. Same thing with rendering. I mean, now that we can do renders faster, we're doing hundreds and thousands of renderings per week on a project because you can just do them so fast. And it's not we're not just doing more renders because it's fun. It's a great communication device with clients. When you could pull apart different.
A language they
Yeah.
speak,
And
for sure.
even early on, when you're just
Yeah.
kind of thinking about, even before materials or with materials, you can just do, you can do 10 different renders of facades and just kind of explain your ideas. It just helps as a communication device. So same thing with Miro. We don't. We don't use
Mhm.
Mural and all of a sudden we're like, oh, well, we saved 100 hours that we can just cut off from the project. It's like now we're all focused on the problems. Like we're all talking about, how to resolve this one, set of rooms on the floor plan instead of, trying to comb through old PDF and PowerPoints and, you got a PowerPoint up here on your right screen from 2 weeks ago, and you have a Excel doc up over here that you're working on in the floor, or working on currently that has the quantities up. So, like that level of efficiency in terms of communication uh, is just so huge that I just feel like people kind of overlook, assume.
And how many of your teams or projects are distributed to? I mean, every project is kind of distributed from like a client to you. You guys are on your end, they're on their end, and I'm sure not everything needs to be a physical meeting, in-person meeting, and presentation and all that. A lot of it can happen sooner, or because you can do it online, whatever. But how many of your projects are distributed across offices and time zones and all those kinds of
Yeah, it
things?
feels like more and more distribution going on. It just feels like the workload is higher. I don't know if that's just me personally, just being on so many projects, but it feels like everyone is on multiple projects. And so, you less and less have the scenario where it's one project in one office. And, there's always, specialists from different locations. There's even, large, you know, uh, work sharing going on. Um, and, with the mural board, if you have things organized by week, if you bring someone on new to the project, they can easily just pan through the project and see what was going on 2 weeks ago, three weeks ago, 2 months ago. Um, where else before, you'd have this whole onboarding experience onto a project and you'd have to, point them to all these, recordings or PowerPoints. So,
Interesting, like tidbit that you just shared there. So, can you explain that a little bit more about how you work
oh,
in Miro? So, it sounds like these Miro boards get really big over time, but you're doing that on purpose so that you have this kind of history built into a Miro board.
right. Yeah. I mean, project teams fill these things up fast and almost have to spin up new ones, but they're documented just like like you'd have a pin up on a big wall where it's like, this is, week one, and this is all the stuff for week one that's going to be, uh, that we're working on. And then it gets, because they just present the mural board kind of live with the client. You just pan around it. Here's where we're at. And then
But then you leave that
leave it
stuff
there.
there and you cross things out or whatever. You don't delete them, but maybe you cross it out or whatever. It's like, nope, we did not choose this one. We chose this one. And then that leads to the next section. Do you guys actually have like templates for this thing or is it just
No
blank
templates,
canvas
but
when
it
you
is
start?
something that's, teams take on as a serious, task, because it's kind of fun to get, how organized can you get your mural boards? And there's, fun things they do, thumbs up on.
It sounds like something my wife would love. Like she loves organization. Yeah. So I could totally see people like thriving on you get a gold star for having the most organized Miro board this week.
Yeah, and it's fun. I mean, yeah. I mean, before, earlier we were talking about designing a UI for interactive dashboards. I find the same thing as designing these mural boards. You want to, if you can design your mural boards to be, a fun, interactive place to go to and like understand the project, the client's gonna, relate to that. They're gonna see, even though it's just a pinup space, there's kind of a passion there for, you know, making it look good.
Yeah, I could imagine if it's too chaotic, which I think is total. Remember Design Studio in school? It was just total chaos, right? And everybody was really comfortable with that. But I can't imagine a client really would be. Like they would see the psychosis in the chaos
Well, when
of
you're
what an
in
architecture
projects
studio
week to
actually
week, I
is.
mean, sometimes some weeks are that, they're just going to be chaotic because, it's,
Yeah.
frantically, you're trying to cut, especially when you're trying to cut budget, right? You're cutting program, you're cutting your,
Oh, for sure. You try all kinds of
and it's
things.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's going to be mass chaos. So, if that week, that set of weeks, it's going to be like chaotic, but yeah, they don't have to be.
But then somebody goes back through it and kind of does the organizational process to it. And
Yeah. Yeah, it could be like
cleans it
like
up.
I can imagine that being like a you're like a librarian curator. I've always thought of
Yeah.
that like the librarian curator role as like a role that I wish existed more at firms. It's almost like because there's
Totally.
so much like knowledge with like one something we've been trying to tackle is well we've been trying to tackle this for years, which is like benchmarking and extracting data from projects. Um, and
Hmm.
that's like such a tough uh, problem to handle. It's just there's so many different places to get project data from. Autodesk is changing all the time, so you're trying to keep up with like how to extract the data from the project. Uh, you want to be able,
Make sure it gets put in the right
yeah.
place. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, so that's a problem we're trying to take on. And it could really be a full time job at firms because as far as I'm aware, I've never really seen a firm solve this problem. And it's something I've been thinking about for a long time. It's like no firm has all the project data from all the different sources in a single like data lake or whatever a database of some
Right.
sort.
I'm sure it exists, but it's a hard challenge. And I just want to say that, and I'm going to give a shout out to somebody that I hired exactly for that type of position, but it was more specialized around content. It was not like firm wide data as far as all project data, but it was in the job description. It was like digital librarian, somebody who wants to build the Dewey Decimal System for our firm for content details and all things around that. And I hired Sarah to do that exact thing, and she was and still is an incredible person because she brings organization to chaos across multiple teams, across multiple offices in multiple states. And it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, you do need somebody because nobody is going to do it right. Who has other incentives, right? They have other goals, they have other deadlines, and you need somebody who can cut across all that and and do that work that is super important for a firm. And I guess something that this leads me to with a tool like Miro is it is completely unstructured data, right? And so you have, I mean, obviously it's fitting the needs of what it needs to do for who it needs to do it for, when it needs to happen, and it's unstructured, right? And this is one of the other issues that's huge, especially at a firm as large as yours, right? I assume, which is like, how do you get usable information out of that so that I don't know if it's at milestones or when it happens, but like how do you handle that side of
Yeah,
this?
and that's not it's not a unique thing to just architecture or AEC. Like every field, every industry deals with this, and I've noticed that especially I mean because if anyone's going to do anything related to AI, you have to have all this data structured in some capacity, even though it's fun to think that we don't that somehow AI will solve all. But
Fiction. Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, all
right.
industries deal with this. Every industry has huge amounts of unstructured data in multiple locations, and you can't make sense of it.
Mm.
But yeah, if we're going to make any progress in any kind of like automation AI, it's just purely data organization is just step one, and it still feels like it's going to be a little bit before we uh we solve that.
Yeah, so do you I mean, obviously these Miro boards just perpetually are just kind of
Yeah.
there out in the cloud somewhere, and the team obviously has access to those. But what do you do to kind of archive those and get that information into some usable thing
Yeah.
later when it comes to project data?
Yeah, I mean that's always it's almost like I mean I don't there's still all the traditional ways of saving project data going on behind
One big PDF,
like
yeah.
or like yeah new format drives and all that kind of stuff. Like all the traditional project documentation is still going on. The report is just like it's just like
Sure.
the front face to
Yeah.
communication.
decision-making tool. Yeah.
But when you're trying to benchmark
Yeah.
stuff, the tough thing is, just extracting Revit data by itself is like the easy part. The hard part is like, all the data that exists elsewhere, uh, Excel data, and trying to kind of, because in some ways you're trying to merge it to some sort of simplified version of the building. Um, because then if I get in a final Revit model, there's no, departments are not being drawn as a boundary in a final Revit set. It's just not something that's needed for the final drawings, but it's something we use,
Yeah.
and it's critically important early on when you plan a project. So you have to
Right.
have mechanisms to get all this stuff together for extracting data and making sense of it and having a standard way of documenting this. I mean, you can have multiple people on the same project will document the key metrics in different ways on one single project.
Can you talk about like who is responsible to do that on your teams?
So no one on our teams, but at HDR overall, it's the planners. So we do a lot. We do
Okay.
a lot of large, complicated technical buildings. So a lot of healthcare, a lot of labs, um, government-sized buildings. So that like we do a lot of big buildings that require uh, planners, and so they're the ones responsible for certifying data on projects, KPUs, benchmarks, all that kind of stuff. And everyone
Okay.
has a little different methodology. So, but yeah, I mean, this is the
Mm,
way I think most firms operate, and it's tough to come together with a kind of comprehensive method for that. But yeah,
yeah.
hoping we're trying to solve that. It's like our own ongoing origin.
And that role doesn't exist on every project type, right? Like healthcare planning is a specialty, and you have a few in the firm usually, and I would imagine that data is really important to them for the next project or 3 projects from now to use as a starting point, right? Because they want to know comparatively, or they want a good starting point. And so, but in other markets, less so, right? And so you maybe don't get the quality of like record keeping when it comes to that kind of information.
Yeah, I mean, this is the main idea or problem I hope that we want to come up with ways of leveraging AI to solve. And it's not even necessarily like AI is probably not even the right word, but like, it's so difficult to extract information from past projects, not even from like a benchmarking standpoint, but
Yeah.
just like if you're um, an architect working on a project, and I mean, first off, you have no idea what's really been, especially if you're new to a firm, like you don't know what projects have been completed in the last 10 years that you can reference. And then
Right.
even if you did, you
Hmm.
still have to figure out how to access those, open up old, Revit drawings. Uh,
Yeah. How many versions of Revit do you keep on people's machines to do? Do you do it like that, or you just upgrade models all
yeah,
the time?
yeah, it's tough. I mean, if you try to open up a Revit file from, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, it's tough. And
Yeah.
then, because I like to imagine some kind of scenario where, like, imagine you're, working in Revit on one screen, and then on another screen, it's like, you draw a single room, and they're like, oh, that same room has been drawn in these 10 different projects. And you can just,
There's your
yeah, here's your
Clippy.
query. I mean, because these projects take so long to do, if you're a project architect, by the time you do it again, you don't have, uh, it's hard to have the muscle memory to know, exactly how to draw things over.
It's more work to go back and look than it is to just do it
Yeah.
fresh a lot of
Yeah.
times, right? Yeah.
So it's like, I imagine if you could just simply like get access quickly to past information would be so helpful, even for,
Yeah.
basic.
You just want like another set of eyes, which is this AI thing that's just always watching what everybody's doing and just the stuff that's useful for
Yeah.
the firm, right? Not all
I
the
mean,
other stuff that people do on their computers too.
it's how we're all
Yeah.
using, like ChatGPT now, which is like, like your Google, I'd say a better Google search, right? You're trying to come up with information. I mean, you're certainly not using it for like, architecture code stuff because it's not going to be correct. But just like in general, that's how most people like use ChatGPT is you're like trying to get, recall information, whatever the topic is. But it's like, if you could have that level of, recalling information so fast when you're working on a project, it's like the level of time savings. I mean, it's kind of, I feel like it's sort of again, something we, when you're like a project architect, you almost kind of forget like, yeah, I mean, you almost like want to reinvent everything from scratch because you're figuring it out and you're doing it. And probably some of that is good, but some of that would be nice to pull up past information quickly and just leverage it and use it and then, move on to the next task. Have to reinvent a bathroom plan every single time.
Yeah. Every time. Yeah. Something you mentioned about the Miro boards and a topic that's come up recently on the podcast is a culture shift that so I had Kate Grimes on recently from Snowhead and talking about knowledge management. And so if you're interested in this little anecdote, listen to that episode. But she talked about kind of they were lamenting the fact that because they were using a tool like Miro so much more because COVID kind of was the forcing function and then it just hung on. Obviously, there's utility to a tool like that. The lamenting was about the physical pinup space was no longer getting used, and they were just like, oh, this culturally is changing our office. And I say lamenting, but I think it was more of a question like, is this okay with us, right? What are our values in this firm and what do we value and why? And just noticing that and saying, okay, like let's have a conversation about it. I think that was totally valid, right? And so it is like technology literally is shifting architectural office culture. There's benefits that come along with it, but there are also things that are going away. And we talked about it kind of as an amputation, right? It's like when new things get added, you can't just keep doing all the old things too, right? You have to amputate some things, or maybe they just get amputated just through work process, right? Like, oh, we just don't do that anymore. We just don't build physical models anymore. Whatever those things are, we don't do watercolor perspectives anymore, right? We don't do traditional rendering before there was computer rendering, and so on and so forth. I'm curious from your point of view, what are the things? Are those kind of conversations happening in a firm like HDR? Is that something that you're aware of, cognizant of, as you introduce new tools? Like, oh, what does this mean for us from an architectural practice level?
Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, we still have our project office. Like certain projects have like a project office and they're required to be in person and they're, doing pinups weekly and that kind of stuff. So in those
Mm-hmm.
scenarios, I'm actually not sure if those teams are doing both mural board and pinup space. Um,
Kind of depends where the team's located, right? If they're all in the same location or not, I would
I don't
assume.
know. I mean, I feel like that issue kind of makes me think of, uh, a lot of times when new tools come up, people quickly think, this certainly is happening a lot with like AI right now, which is like this new tool is created and we use it and it feels like we're putting like less care into our work. So, before we would spend all this time and energy, focused on making a, a rendering, and now we just hit a button and we don't think about it. Now that's like simply not true at all. But
Right.
it's also the care and enthusiasm that you bring to the project and the project team. So it's like if you can bring the same level of care that you would have with a physical pinup space to like a digital pinup space. I mean, to me, that's ultimately what, people can like relate to, whether the project team or the client is like, they want to know that the people on the team, care about what they're building and, are
Mhm.
excited to be there and participate in it. So if you spend that level of care curating a digital space, um, I think it's going to come through the same as a, a physical one. And that doesn't mean we're not doing like physical pinups, because again, we just do still have a lot of big projects, especially our IPD projects that are, we do have like project offices, and they're pinning up stuff all the time. But I just think sometimes these new tools come up and people think that, we're automating what used to be something we would put all our care and time in. So yeah, there's still, I mean, just with the same way when we're talking about earlier about the shift from physical models to digital models and digital renderings. Um, people always thought, I remember, renderings was, it kind of makes me think of, back to the Pixar story when John Lasseter pitched Toy Story for the first time. And when he pitched it to, or not, he didn't pitch a Toy Story, but like an earlier version of it, like Tin Toy, to like Disney, and was,
Yeah. Right.
we want to use this computer. We want to use the computer as a new way of making film, because they saw, like, I think it was Tron, and the president of Disney said, okay, great, you can do it, but it has to be, you can do it, but you have to do it for half the budget. And his whole point was like, no, it's not, like, that's not what we're trying to do here. Is the goal isn't to like cut out half the budget by using the new computer tool. It's like a way for us to build a new style of films.
Yeah.
So I've always thought about like
Yep.
new tools and time in a lot of that way, where it's like the goal isn't to just like make it faster and easier. You still have the same like care to use it.
Yeah. If gleaning what I could, kind of reading between the lines, to me it seems like the feeling was, because it's environmental, right? I remember in architecture school, right, the studio was, like we said a minute ago, chaos, right? And it was modeling crap everywhere and pinned up and ripped and shredded and pieces and trash and right, everything's mixed up. And part of design studio is just like that environment, and having stuff on the walls in your periphery, kind of informing, oh yeah, I remember we talked about that. And with things being confined to a screen, it's like, well, no, I have to go into the app. I have to pan around and find the thing I was, oh, it's not right. It's not where I thought it was. And I got to find another place. And I think, again, reading between the lines, to me, that's more the sentiment of like the values of a design firm in Snowheada's case, right? That's what they say they are, and that's what they want to be, and that's how they want to be, perceived in the marketplace as design first, and therefore that was part of their culture. And it's like, oh, part of that's kind of going away. What does it mean? Does it mean something? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I just thought that was an interesting way to kind of think about this. I don't know. Architects could continue to revisit the same questions over and over and over again too, and not really make a decision. And so maybe we're just wasting time with a conversation like that, because like things are changing, whether you like it or not. They are, right? So I'm just curious. That to me is kind of the sentiment
If
that I took
everyone, I
away
mean, if
from it.
everyone's in the same location and the client is coming weekly,
Yeah, it's one
like I
office.
would
Yeah,
imagine
right.
that physical pinup would be what you're using all the time. But like
Hmm.
every project, it's tough for the client to come in, meet you every single week. It's tough for, all the
Yeah,
engineers to come in and meet and, stand and on
for
board.
sure.
So it seems so unlikely that, I mean, there are cases where it does happen. And I do think teams are using physical pinup spaces, but I think the main value is the communication with the client, and the fact that they can at any point, like, kind of access all that information. But yeah, I mean, it is like,
And kind of that archival process that you're talking about, right? Like that's valuable, and you don't get that with a physical pinup unless you like take a picture of it and maybe you tag stuff. I don't know. Like it's another problem altogether.
yeah, I mean, the physical pinup, I mean, it's only, yeah, I mean, the goal is, I mean, more and more of all the stuff we build, I mean, the goal is how clear can you communicate with a team, client?
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
what things do you need to, can you, you know, we do a lot of like, not a lot, but some collaboration with, cost estimators, or even like sometimes rare occasions like contractors, and organizing. We're trying to assemble our quantities and line it up with their cost information so that the client can understand. Um,
Get an accurate picture.
because
Yeah, for sure.
the estimator, I mean, they assemble their cost one way, and then we put together our drawings, our model in one way, and then we beat up and present to the client, and it's like, well, if I take off a level to the building, like how much money is that going to save me? And then we got to go back and do that also. Like, there's so many different scenarios where you want to like figure out ways of connecting information, and it's all for the purpose of like just clear communication with the client. So like, within you know, uh, a minute, or, whatever, a second, they can ask a question that you have the information readily available, or you can quickly get to it,
Hmm.
and, accessing information. I think that's a lot of the AI tools I've seen that have interested me, is like where, all the project information is, it's a kind of database that can be like, you can just recall any information, any like meeting minutes. We're not using any of those, but it's something I've been watching and seeing, because that's a huge issue. The client has a question from meeting minutes from 2 months ago. The last thing they want to do is go track down the Word doc with all the meeting notes.
Yeah. Well, why did we make that decision? Who made that decision? What were they thinking? Right. It's like, well, yeah, finding that information is a chore
Yeah.
for sure.
So yeah, I mean, this makes me think of like how what ways like think like AI are going to help. Uh, like where it's really going to make a difference in the short term. I think it's going to be like stuff like, I mean, it already is, but it's tough to find the right instance. From a security purposes, not really a great way to do that yet. But we're
Well, and we keep our information in so many different places. Like you've got Miro boards, you've got email, you've got Newforma, you've got chat, you've got, Teams or Slack or whatever it is. And it's like you need something that cuts through across all that. Because if you don't, you're only getting a piece of the picture, not the whole picture.
yeah. And like I said, I know like a lot of project teams out there that have like not HDR project teams, but other there's tools on the market that do this that I've been tracking, but it's like some of it will be solved by Copilot. That's what kind of Copilot is doing already with search.
Cutting across all
Yeah.
that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Email, OneNote. Yeah. Places where people normally keep their stuff. Probably not third party stuff like, I don't know, Open Asset and Bluebeam
Yeah.
and,
Like
Miro and stuff
do
like
you
that
use
yet.
any of
But
those AI tools for all your like productivity and tracking and
yeah, I do because I use Notion for almost everything. Like my whole life, at least professionally, is inside Notion. And because it is a note taker and a database, it actually works really well for getting information accessible, like surfacing information that I need to find, or connecting dots between certain disparate pieces of information because it's all in one place. And so like I'm not a Microsoft subscriber, but I could imagine it being similarly useful across a suite of applications like that.
yeah.
So and one nice thing about Notion is yeah, like it ties into my Gmail, right? And so I can, because my calendar and my email and then my notes and everything else about my episodes and all that stuff is kind of in one ecosystem, I can
Yeah.
leverage that.
Yeah, I mean, so much of like I think the AI tools that people kind of overlook is that like that access to information and like
Hmm.
all your
Hmm.
personal information. I love it when you have like a thought and you're like, oh, I remember like being at this conference like 3 years ago, and and then you could just like search it really quick and find it. Uh, I mean, that's kind of where you want to be at.
Yep,
Like imagine
absolutely.
like that level of searching for like all the projects you're working on and information.
Hmm. Yeah. Or and it having it with what we've seen lately, have it build you an agenda of what you need to do this week based on chats you've
Yeah.
had, emails you've sent, what's on your calendar. Like what do I actually need to pay? What am I I don't want to miss something that's super important, right? And you can actually leverage it to do that.
Do you have the
Yeah.
AI build your agenda, your to-do list for the day, and you're like, well, I didn't think I was.
I haven't done that. I haven't done that, but I'm newly kind of I'm revisiting this idea of just time blocking,
Yeah.
right? So I think we can all agree like there's way too many meetings on the calendar, right? And then there's times you're not in meetings, which is like get stuff done, but what is the priority, right? And so I'm actually, going towards like the more Cal
Yeah,
Newport
yeah.
method, which
I've
right?
gone down that.
Time blocking, right? Slow productivity, which means like intentional, high quality, deep work done in certain blocks of time so that you actually work on stuff that's meaningful and not just constantly reacting and
Yeah.
distraction.
Yeah, I've gone down the Cal Newport rabbit hole because there's so many ideas in there about how to like optimize every time. But then eventually you get to a point where like if you have an off day, it makes you feel horrible because then you're like, I had an off day and I got nothing done and I had all these time blocks and so
Oh,
it's
man.
all time
Yeah,
blocking.
he says be careful. Like only use it for work. Don't use it for your personal life because it takes overhead to manage it. Like it takes effort and work, and so managing that for your personal life too is just too much. She's like, so use it just for your work life. At least start
I
there.
mean, one thing I feel like I've always taken from the Cal Newport stuff is always just like, uh, every day, just like, if you can only work on two or three things, what's the thing you're going to get done?
Yes.
Because, you know,
Yeah.
all these initiatives we work on, at our firms, there's so many important topics. I mean, this is why like benchmarking never gets solved is because it's an initiative, but you're not working on it, full time, but you have to make progress on this. And yeah, if you spend all your time, doing emails and curating your mural board, you're never gonna, you know,
It's not pushing stuff forward. I mean, it's useful for sure, but it's not moving the needle, right? I mean, it might move the needle on the next project, but it's rarely going to move it
yeah.
on this one.
And
So,
even more so now, I mean, with all
yeah.
these tools coming out, I mean, I do find it productive to constantly be testing new stuff. I mean, this kind of comes from my, interest from like VFX, there's just always, uh,
Hmm.
I'm trying to take it in as like not as like overwhelming with the amount of tools. And the goal isn't to like use all these tools, but to just be aware of all the tools that are
For
available.
sure.
Because if you're not, paying attention to this stuff, there's all these amazing use cases that, uh, I don't know, you just all of a sudden you can't, you know, adapt to all this, new technology that's coming out, or even just know what might even be available in the near future.
Yeah, I agree. Do you have any examples that can think of, like off the top of your head, of things that you've paid attention to, and maybe it's not the right time right now for a use case, but it's like, oh, keep that in the back
Yeah, like I
pocket.
said, our interns this summer was like a really fun experiment for us. So at the start, at the start of summer, we knew we wanted to kind of try to start using like agent coding cursor,
Mhm.
like more for these not necessarily like long term tool building, but for like short term tool building. So things for just spin up for a project. And so it's kind of been
Yeah.
something we've been, using a little bit over the last year, but this over the last summer, we're like, all right, let's make this like a thing. We're gonna have like, 6 licenses of cursor. We're gonna have, like build a new app every single week. Like how much can we build in a day? And it's like finish that app, build up a
Hmm.
new one, build a new one. And so now,
Hmm.
now we're starting to get a sense of like, now that the models are getting better and we're like, you can build up, dashboards so quickly with cursor. And it's like, maybe, we're starting to see how we could leverage that as more of like a kind of, day to day kind of data visualization tool. Uh, so that's one example, but so it's all, most things we've built have always been like something we tested as a side project. So like we had an intern like we were testing Stable Diffusion 3 years ago, and an intern was testing it, and then we like completed that task, and then it was like a year later where all of a sudden it got a lot better, and we were like, oh yeah, I think we were testing that a year ago. I think we could turn that into a kind of production level tool. So we're looking for stuff like that.
Let's take a short break from the conversation to tell you about something that I think is pretty great, and you might be interested in it. And that is my exclusive newsletter available only to paid members of TRXL Plus that I call Leadership Edge. If you're looking to stay ahead of the curve in architecture and technology, Leadership Edge delivers insights that you won't find anywhere else. Why? Well, because they are my deep dives into the podcast conversations, just like the one that you're listening to in this episode, to give you an edge on the industry. Each edition of the newsletter provides key insights for forward-thinking leaders seeking innovation in AEC who are short on time, offering the context of each conversation without the need to listen to the full episode. I've actually designed them, though, to keep you updated, spark your interest, and encourage you to tune into the full episodes if those ideas resonate. And the best part is that they are packed with actionable takeaways to help you navigate the future of practice. By becoming a paid supporter, you get Leadership Edge delivered right to your inbox, and it's a direct way to support my podcast while getting exclusive, valuable content to sharpen your leadership mindset. You can join today at trxl.co and start receiving my Leadership Edge newsletters. Just click the subscribe button either in the upper right-hand corner or at the bottom of the page, or you can visit the link that I put in the show notes. Thanks. Now back to the conversation. What do you think is the new cadence for revisiting tools? I find like this is kind of an interesting topic because it's gotten shorter. For sure. I mean, it's like the thing that it didn't used to do, it does it now probably. And so I think a lot of times we write off some tool because it didn't do this for my market, didn't do this for my user, and now like you wrote it off. And so now you just don't pay attention anymore and it does it now.
Yeah. I mean, I even struggle with that mindset, but yeah, I mean, that's like happens all the time. And that's why there's so many great tools on the market too, like especially all the web-based tools out there now that
stuff that just shifts like that. Yeah. The new version is just always available and you don't even it's not a desktop based platform that you have to reinstall or whatever. It's just like, oh yeah, just reload the page and there's the new version.
I'm always looking to test those every so often. I'm always spinning up, trying to get a free account just to test it. I just want to see like, it's like you test it once and then, yeah, maybe it's like a year later, 2 years later, like, oh yeah, maybe we could start using that, or a project team will reach out and, they have a very particular use case and then, be like, oh, you should think about using this tool.
Do you guys have any kind of way to track kind of user requests like that where it's like, oh, now this tool does a thing and you don't have to just try to remember who asked you that question, but there's some, I don't know, is it like some IT helpline? I don't know what it would be, but it's like, how do you connect those dots inside your firm?
Yeah. I mean, we don't do it on our team, but it is something we've talked about recently, which is like, we should like document, because people get subscriptions to certain tools and then, they're just like a one-off and nobody really knows that they're even using it.
Oh my gosh, I can't. Yeah, that's got to be a nightmare. Yeah, happens all the time.
But yeah, I mean, we don't track that on our team. I would imagine for the people that are in IT that have to deal with that is like an extreme task. But yeah, I mean, we do have like an A.
But you're linked to practice, right? You're linked to practice, so it's like that. Those are the users that are getting stuff done. And so they're always, I don't know, maybe they're not, maybe there's some of them are always looking for a better way to do something. Maybe there's a solution, maybe there isn't, but it's like, it seems like it would be useful to have that information available because you guys are more on the bleeding edge and you are looking at tools and you are trying things out. And it's like, oh, I could connect that dot for you. I mean, it might not be the right time anymore, but on the next project, you should know that thing exists.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you might have ideas of how to solve this. I mean, where I always find the hang up anytime you kind of get into this scenario where we're going to document our tools, It's just like a common scenario, right? You're going to document our tools for our process. All the tools that we use are for, there's even, plugins for plugins, right? So it's like, there's so many, like, there's
Right.
like, there's so many like levels and meta levels to this scenario. And it's like, I don't find it, helpful when you're like saying we both use, you know, Rhino, and then we use this like, you know, extremely small plugin for Grasshopper, and they're both on the same, chart as like these are tools we use. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so uh, I don't know. I mean, outside of like knowledge shares, it's hard to document it. I mean, as soon as you get beyond like 10 tools, it's like I have no idea what, um,
Totally.
just because it just becomes like
Yeah.
a,
Too much information.
in a matrix, it just becomes one item. And if you don't know what that item does or why, then it's like you just,
You don't have
yeah,
the
you don't have the
context. Yeah. Yeah. That's what bugs me about like these online databases of tools for architects where there's 1,600 tools. It's like, what am I going to do with that? There's no curation. It's quantity, right? Not quality. Or I need to know for my specific use case and obviously I think you can drill down, like to get back to our Power BI example and get more specific, but there's a lot of stuff going on and it's changing all the time. The only thing that I could really say as far as, a potential solution is I like the new tasks kinds of things that ChatGPT and Perplexity will do, and I'm sure others do it too, where you can set a cadence for a task to repeat, and you could have it deliver you some kind of research or
oh yeah,
whatever around a particular subject, and then at least you have kind of a feed of updates in that thing that you have kind of prompted as a specific thing you're looking for, or like what are the I always want to know what it is for this market with this tool set. What are the latest advances? It doesn't have to be AI, right? It could be
yeah,
anything. And because people are constantly publishing updates and press releases and all these things about what their tools will do, and those can actually provide a pretty succinct breakdown of what's new in this area, at least for you just to stay kind of current on. And if there is a breakthrough, you'll get notified
yeah.
about it.
Yeah, I also I like tracking tools in other industries as well.
Mm.
Like what was that new runway tool that came? What do they call it? Like it's like an alpha or runway althea or something like that. Their new like AI.
I don't know the name. I'm familiar with Runway,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Um, I mean, unfortunately, like I think we're gonna have like more. It's just the list is just gonna, just we, with AI
Yeah.
coding, the amount of tools going to
Yeah.
skyrocket. And I'm okay with that. I'm actually excited
Yes.
about a lot of those tools. And um, I think that's okay. I just hope that you just got to figure out what, tools work for your project and your firm to leverage them. I mean, to me, the exciting thing about with all those new tools is like, because there's, very, senior people on projects and, they don't know Revit or Rhino. They don't have great ways of like, just being able to, jump in and work on a project, but, they bring a ton of value to teams. And if there's
Right.
a certain tool
Right.
that comes up that's, web-based and they just know how to, could be, doing floor plans or, technical drawings or certifying data. But if they can get in there as part of like the team and solving problems for the project team, like that's going to be huge for like productivity for everyone.
Let's segue into your team, D3 at HDR, and maybe explain the origins of that. I think you were probably there before that team actually got started. And I'm curious from like a firm strategy point of view too, how that happened. Was this you pushing this initiative? Was it coming from leadership, et cetera? So start at the beginning with where this happened in your tenure at HDR.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, every firm has like some version of a computational design team. Sometimes they're tied into the BIM practice group. Sometimes they're tied into the IT group. Sometimes they're just part of offices um, in each like office location, and then they kind of come together. And then in some firms, they kind of specialize in certain things. For us, we started, we do a lot of, again, mentioned we do a lot of like technical buildings with healthcare and lab. And so there's a lot of like early stage data that's going on with these. And so, 7 or 8 years ago, we started collaborating. At the time, I was in a BIM practice group, and I was the computational design representative. But we found ourselves collaborating more and more with the data scientists at the time. And so we sort of early on figured out that was a unique service that we could offer to clients, where we kind of, we have the data analytics side, and we also have the computational design side, whether that's, dashboarding, modeling, Grasshopper, that kind of stuff. But there was a lot of value of us collaborating, and then we would provide, services early on for clients. So again, that could be like programming, schematic design. We were doing a lot of that stuff. And then that's where it really started. It was just me by myself for a little bit, and then, added a few others. But, we were very much focused on, this was like 8, 10 years ago, very much focused on, Grasshopper scripts. But, as we found more and more success, we found interesting roles that weren't being addressed. Again, these are like related to early stage, programming. Like imagine, creating like program documents, get very kind of like data driven capacity models, that kind of stuff. So we found ourselves doing a lot of that work, and we could help transition those program documents into early schematic design. So we were helping to quickly generate all the, rooms and departments, and then, we're kind of coming at it from a design background. So we would then just jump into working with the design team, configuring the buildings, and then doing any other kind of specialty tasks on the project. So that's how we started. And we did that for many years. And then over the last 5 years, we've expanded to building tools. So first it was, plugins for Rhino and Revit. And then in the last couple of years, we've hired a few full stack web developers. So we're starting to build web applications. And so now our team is split half software developers, half computational designers. And so that kind of puts us in a unique spot where we're both working on projects and we're also building tools. And so we cover a lot of ground by doing that, because then we can just take the tools we're building and then implement them on projects. And then at the same time we're working on projects, we're helping to train people on project teams. So, do all the necessary stuff to train people and use the tools and support their roles. And then we're also kind of leading up certain projects from a data-driven perspective. And again, mentioned this at the beginning, but this is the role that I think that we're have a unique take on for the firm and the industry overall, which is like on a project team, when you have a principal architect and a BIM manager, starting to have a computational designer, a D3 person on the team, and they can help kind of tackle all the incredible amount of like random stuff that comes on. So whether that's a dashboard for cost estimating, or a travel path script, or a facade optimization tool, daylight analysis, people in the D3 team can just kind of tackle all these things, and they can either do it themselves, or they quickly know who to work with from a specialty modeling perspective to kind of work with it, get that work done quickly.
So are they dedicated to that team for a certain amount of time in perpetuity for that project? Like how do you guys distribute them?
Yeah. So we see ourselves like, so some project teams have really, I don't know, it's technical savvy people. And so we'll just become a support role to them. And then some teams just have, they don't have you know, it might be a more technical project in terms of data. So like a project that's, has a cost estimator on it. We want to combine all this stuff, then we'll kind of be on it more full time. So we cover both
Hmm.
ends of the spectrum, and it just depends on the makeup of the team, what additional services we're offering to the client. Um, but yeah, we always pitch ourselves that we're both uh, support role, lead up projects. We can have certain contracts that we have just for D3. Like I said, a lot of like living master plans, we kind of just take on ourselves and we'll build out the models and the dashboards and do the analytics and deliver that to clients.
But talk about that pitching yourself. So you said you pitch yourselves. What does that mean in a firm? Does it mean you're constantly kind of beating the drum of like, these are our capabilities. These are some examples of what we've brought to projects. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we find too is like, all the RFPs that are coming out now, there's a lot of RFPs that have specific language around uh, dashboards, AI tools. And so there's a lot of projects that, sometimes the client is just very, uh, analytical. And so they want to know all
Mm,
the stuff they can about their project. And so so when we pitch them on, being able to do dashboards and we can quantify all this data for you in real time, like they really get um, excited about the idea of like having all that information quickly available. And so, we're
mhm.
providing that service ongoing for that client during the project. And so we kind of come in with you know, our part of the project and we'll just specifically solve that. Um, and yeah, like I said, and then other times it's like, the project team just wants to know how to, use a certain tool, and then we'll just do some training for them, get them set up, show them our standards and templates, and then we just kind of we're on call to help support them anytime they have a question.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm curious, like you said, you build a lot of tools, and I think there was a lot of consternation back in the day. I don't know if it's still the case, so I'm curious to find out what you say about this. But a lot of times there was a lot of pressure to build tools that got reused, right? And Paul Wintour wrote a great essay. I think you published it to LinkedIn. It's on their blog on their website about unused, forgotten about. Like there's all these tools that are out there, and they just are sitting somewhere on a server now. How much of the stuff that you build is just purpose built to solve a problem on a project? Who cares if it gets used again or not? Versus, and do you even make the distinction like we're building this and the feature set's going to grow over time and we're taking feature requests and versus like, oh, we're just going to solve this problem and one and done.
Yeah, I mean, recently, we're a lot more cautious about the tools we build because we know the amount of time and effort that's needed on the back end to support that tool and update it. Um, so anything we build now, we're looking for, I mean, this is why I like the web's a great place to build tools is because, if you don't have to work in the constraints of, Revit or Rhino, anyone can use them, reuse them. Um, but yeah, we're always, I mean, it's the thing that I'm always thinking about a lot, which is like, because if you were to always just build a tool that a project team requested, I mean, have thousands and thousands of tools,
Yeah.
and that's the tough thing about
Right.
building, like your own custom Revit automation tools is like even though it saves time, there's still people have to know that it exists, and that's
Yeah.
tricky. So then it comes to whatever tools we build need to have like a multiplier of at least 10 in terms of like time savings. It can't just be it's twice as fast because if it's only twice as fast, then people will
Mm,
just not use the tool because they have to spend time to learn it.
mhm.
So it has to be at least like 10 times
Yeah.
faster. It's like kind of what the metric I'm always thinking of. Um, and if we can build tools that are like a web tool, not necessarily like a Revit tool is great. I mean, we still build Revit tools, um, but I don't know. We're just thinking more and more, trying to build stuff that is going to be used for a long period of time. There's also trying to think of tools that we're building that is specific to how we work and think as a firm about buildings. So because, we don't want to build a tool that someone else could just build and you know, we could just buy it, use it. So a lot of the tools we're thinking
Yeah.
about is like, part of our workflow, part of our IP, like how our knowledge gets embedded into the tool so that when somebody uses it, it's not just saving time, it's also accessing, our knowledge.
Do you have any examples that you are willing to share of things like that that you've done?
Yeah, one tool, well, I guess two tools I mentioned. We have a tool for Revit that we call the replicator, and it automates some kind of the placement of furniture in a room. So it pulls it from a stored database of like where the different furniture pieces are located, and then automatically place where those are at. So that's a great example because it's leveraging information from past projects, like where a bed or a chair is located, and then
And that was like manual, right? Manually placed back
yeah,
that you're pulling that from, but then you're using that as an example to go forward and say, okay, best guess, here's where those things are going to
exactly,
go.
yeah. And it's not, it's not using AI. It's just like relationships of between, where a wall is and how much space it is between another family and asset. Um, so,
Hmm.
that's a good tool for us to build because it's embedding, our knowledge from past projects, and it's also a level of automation that's can be pretty time intensive if you do that for, every single room for a whole project.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, what the time savings for something like that have got to be massive, especially on these
Yeah, the
large
large
projects.
project thing, yeah, is massive. Um, so there's uh, tools like that. There's like we built our own custom tool for Rhino that assigns data to objects, but there's all kinds of like embedded formulas for calculating all kinds of different um, ratios and calculations for quantities and benchmarking data, and it connects to Excel and connects to our database and syncs data. So those kinds of tools are extremely helpful because it's um, accessing data, pulling data, and visualizing data. So yeah, anytime we can.
Kind of objects, what kind of information, like what are you
Oh,
talking about here? Because to me it's like, oh, is this early project like it's like Jello cubes and you're assigning metadata to, volumes that are rooms and spaces and things like that, or is it
yeah, it
different?
could be like yeah. I mean, early on, you could like for like room information, you can assign. So a lot of times, there's a program is created, and there's all this information like what's in a
Hmm.
room. And so all that data
Hmm.
can just be quickly assigned, via Excel into the objects in Rhino. So that way, the Rhino is just a box, and then you have all the data associated with it. But that we built
Great.
that application, and we've expanded over the years, and we can quickly sync it into Revit, and so there's all these like pipelines that it connects to. And
So that stays in the project. It's not like you have to start over once you go to
yep,
Revit.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Um,
cool.
so yeah, a lot of the tools we're thinking about are kind of in that nature of where, um, yeah, it embeds some of our knowledge and in past projects, and then also it's serving sort of like a automation and data visualization role.
Mm. So your team, you've talked about it. Like, I'm just curious. Like, how are you physically distributed? You said you have people in Australia. You have some people, different, located all over the place. So I assume they're kind of remote
Yeah,
workers. But do you have people in physical offices as well? And I'm just curious how you operate. It sounds complicated, right? You've got a lot of people in the offices. You've got a lot of offices. You've got a lot of locations. How are you actually distributing your people and assigning them to different projects and things like that? How are you managing all
yeah.
that?
A lot of the people in the project, the great thing about people being in uh, our computational designers that are in different offices is that they're fully engaged with the office. So as projects come up in the office, they're working with the office. They know what the stuff that's going on in that office, as well as, dealing with, because we have requests that come in from offices that don't have anyone. So then we, quickly to support them. But it's tough. We try to do a lot of stuff. I mean, obviously everything, we meet virtually. We're always looking for different ways to like uh, uh, communicate and try to have those impromptu conversations, about new stuff that's coming out.
with the mural board
Yeah, the
attached to
mural
it, man.
board. Uh, for a while, we would last year for a while we would have a lot of us have like VR goggles, and we used to like play like mini golf in VR as like a virtual like hangout session, but we haven't done that for a while.
Team
Team
building.
building, yeah, but it's important. The team building stuff virtually is important because when you're early on in your career and you're in a different office that doesn't, not like may not be dialed into all this stuff, there has to be ways to communicate. I mean, just for your own, just to be, it's hard to be aware of all the stuff that's going on at the firm level. And, it can't just be like a meeting and we just like list off, here's all the new stuff. Looking for the informal conversations is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you guys record those meetings and have like AI assistants taking notes and so you can like query meetings over time and kind of, I don't know, you pull information that might be useful to you in some way?
We don't do that. I did start something recently that I've been testing where it's just like it's a distributed email, but it's just like one image, one sentence. Because you only have like it's like awareness. So it's like if you just are just aware that like a project team built like a dashboard for facade and you're looking at the
Yes.
overall
Yeah.
ratio, you just know that this team or this person over here built that. And then if something comes up in 3 months that they're trying to figure out, then they're like, oh, I know where to go. I know that we've done that before.
Hopefully they saw that
Yeah.
email. Yeah.
But it's tough,
Right.
sometimes we find that we have better, we can communicate better via posting on LinkedIn and then for everyone.
With
Yeah.
your firm.
Because then more people reach out from like different, sectors and groups in the firm. And they're like, oh, I saw you post that on LinkedIn.
Interesting.
Um, because yeah, I mean,
Interesting.
email is a
Yeah.
tough medium to get through. And we're all tired of going to hour-long meetings.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really interesting insight, like that people are watching LinkedIn probably a little closer than their inbox because their inbox is inundated.
Yeah.
Not that a LinkedIn feed is not inundated with a bunch of junk either, but it's funny the hit rate might be a
Yeah.
little higher there. And it just kind of points out that like you kind of have to communicate in a lot of different ways over and over and over again for somebody to catch the message for something they might use
You
someday,
do.
right? Like that kind of bottles what you're
Yeah. I mean,
talking
there's no
about.
perfect way to do this other than just doing all of them all the time whenever you're thinking of it. So whether it's
Yeah.
like, onboarding with new people that join the firm, it's knowledge shares, meetings. It's hard to have a regular reoccurrence with all these, but yeah, we try to hit them all. People do different stuff. Even the workshops in person. It's like, you sign up for it and then, the day comes and it's like you're on a deadline and the last thing you want to do is go to some training
Yep.
session. So like training sessions are like,
Right.
we don't even really do that many anymore because it's so hard to get people to attend.
Interesting. I was going to ask you about kind of technology training. I mean, there's lots of other kind of training that has to happen inside of a firm, but it sounds like you've gone away from in-person stuff. Do you do like lunch and learn style things with stuff your D3 group is working on, or is it really just down to these one-liner
Well, the
emails
best thing we do is like
and
do
then,
short, like 30
touch points?
minute, like, so whatever tool, we have, we'll do a number of 30-minute training sessions for them, whether it's like an intro, advanced training, and then we just post them on the SharePoint site. And so like,
Hmm.
because it tends to be like when people need training, it's when they've never, they're new to the firm or they're just trying to learn the tool. And if you could just send
Hmm.
them like a 30-minute video and it's like, here's an intro one, here's 30-minute, advanced use case of it. I find most of the time that's all they really need. And then they're off and using it on their own. They don't need,
Hmm.
4 hour long, 2 day long, training in person session. Uh, they can learn everything they need to in just a couple short 1 hour videos.
Yeah. I guess maybe just to wrap it up, what are you excited about? What have you seen? We've mentioned a bunch of tools and things that you're using and things that you're excited about. But I mean, I think the last time I saw you in person, it must have been AU, San Diego, I think, because I didn't go to the last one in Nashville. And you were
Yeah.
like bringing up the idea of quantum computing and how that might shift things. But what are some bigger picture, not just like apps and stuff like that that we're seeing, change on the daily now, but bigger picture stuff. What, or maybe not exciting, but interesting.
Yeah. Um, I think just like I'm really excited about potentially uh like I was mentioning, like the access to information and the ability for more people to be involved in, producing the data and the drawings, and ultimately
Hmm.
this becoming, somewhat smaller teams, because, smaller teams could be more nimble and faster and uh,
Nimble.
more
Yeah.
enjoyable. So like all these tools, like providing, um, a way to just people like communicate and, communicate better on a project. So you can, like, if you're working on a project, that like you're contributing in a way that's like directly related and like, efficient for that project. So like could be, that could be a number of things that are going to happen for that to happen. So that could be a number of like, um, AI tools. That could just be like how we're all working together. And I think that's going to be, you know, a fun way of like, people just feeling more efficient about our process and our workflow. You don't have to spend all these hours like redoing, you know, uh, work because, there's only, two people in the Revit model, and then all these other people are doing, you know, uh, sketches or calculations off to the side. Uh, so I'm excited about a future where, not necessarily like less people on the project, but it could be less people on the project. Um, and, because it's like
With like more with superpowers,
superpowers,
right? Like I think that's kind of what you're meant.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, because we're never going to be automated out of a job. I recently saw, so I can't remember what I was listening to, but it was describing like how AI has affected like the radiologists, because I think it's like definitely
Hmm.
one thing that people thought for sure like AI was gonna, to the point where like they were saying like don't even go to, you know if you go to medical school, don't specialize in radiology because it's just all going to be automated.
Right.
And what turns
Hmm.
out is like there hasn't been, there's an even more need for radiologists than, 5 years ago. And that's not because there's less people going into radiology. It's just there's uh, more of a need for it. The actual part of, you know, reading images is only like, 30 to 40% of their job. There's still large amounts of work that they're doing outside of just like reading like images today.
Sure.
And they have to, certify the results, make sure they're correct. So
Take responsibility
yeah,
for
take
it. Yeah.
responsibility for it. And I just think that's, even though it just seems like from an outside perspective that like AI could just solve that and there's going to be less of a need for radiology, like it's in practice, there's too much at stake to just simply say, well, AI is going to
Mm.
automate that. And so I find that is
Mm.
going to be the case for architecture. If you're spending, you know, $1 billion on a building, like you don't want just someone to come in and automate it and save, $1 million because we automated it. We don't have to, like spend time like planning it. So like the stakes are too high in a building to just say like AI is going to automate it. But, with all these tools, we can work really effectively and have really meaningful conversations about what problems we're solving for the client.
How important is collaboration, multiplayer? Like we're seeing this everywhere, right? With tools that Figma, I think, is kind of credited with kind of kicking this off, which was, you can see everybody's cursor. I'm sure in Miro you can do that. Everybody can be in the same Miro board at the same time doing whatever. How important is that, and when is it important on a project? Because I don't think it's important all the time, but is this kind of a table stakes level of feature set that needs to be in most of the prevalent apps that we're using for a lot of work, or is this something that's just overhyped in your opinion right now at this current time?
Yeah, that's why all the tools are going to be web based is because they can be collaborative. I mean, that's like the downfall of
Google Docs,
yeah,
yeah,
Google Docs. I
yeah,
mean, when you can that's half of like just figuring out Revit is just how the model is going to be divided up and who's working on what part. And
totally. And you're going to decide incorrectly.
yeah, yeah, and it's like if you can just all be in the same model working together and not have to deal with thinking about all that's huge. I mean, there's lots of small applications that already do that already, and I think we're going to certainly see that more and more. I mean, it doesn't have to be like the whole projects on the web, though. I mean, I'm sure we'll eventually get there. That at least lots of parts of the project can certainly be there. I mean, at some point, there's got to be either Revit's going to be on the web or some new version of competitor of Revit will be some kind of web-based 3D modeling. I mean, there's lots of them out there, and that's like a
Yeah, Forma's on the web,
yeah,
like that's
true.
their
Yeah,
supposed replacement, right? So yeah, for that reason. I mean, also because it's using APIs that are plugging into analyses, data sets, and those have to be current. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think one of the big holdups, at least currently still, is just the data set size, right? These models are complicated, they're
yeah,
big, and if we can get to a point where we don't have to worry about performance over a web browser for these huge models because we didn't have to decide how to break it up, but it can just handle it.
yeah.
Like that would be
Well,
a huge stepping stone. And
I think there are some new browsers. There's some new browser technology that's coming out that will help with the GPU like computing power of these. I can't remember what the names are, but that's going to be a big thing if we start seeing new browsers that come out that can really handle larger models. That's certainly going to help a lot.
one that I'm well, not a browser, but like a new kind of technology is the fragments application. Have you seen this? It's basically a 3D modeling based data set that people can build BIM applications on top of that will distribute huge amounts of geometry very fast and render it, in 3D in a web browser. So it's kind of like a foundation for next generation BIM applications because it's really specific to this industry, but it then enables, I think, the kind of performance and multiplayer, that's another layer on top of it. But that's the kind of thing that we kind of need to get. It's really difficult, like you're saying, to take these older, you know, industry stalwarts and upgrade them and put band-aids on them and patch them to be what you need in a modern working environment. Rather, those are just going away and new things are going to come in and replace them that can just do that natively.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to look at that. But yeah, that's the problem. I mean, that's the ultimate problem to be able to solve is like, you have to work at that level of detail to produce the drawings. But
Hmm.
obviously the problem is it's hard for everyone to work at that level of detail all the time. And if you could have,
Right.
if the, either the geometry or the data can be, extracted in a way that, um, you can work with all this data and information interoperability just in ways of people just communicating about the project and the drawings in different ways is like, I mean, that's how efficiency is going to be gained without just purely like, again, the automation task. It's more about like a collaborative solution than like a geometry solution.
Yeah, it's extraction and abstraction, which is what architectural drawings are, right? It's some level of information that is necessary to communicate the idea, right? And so it doesn't need to have all the detail all the time. It needs to be abstracted to a level that is understandable. And we've definitely gotten away from that as an industry. It's like more detail. Yes, you look at a modern set of plans and there is so much stuff on the page. It is difficult to read what's going on there. And graphic communication is a part of that, right? Like line weights, for example, just to go way back, right? It was about line weights and how to make it graphically represent so that it was readable. And now it's less about line weights and it's more about filtering and what do I need to see in this view, right? To communicate what needs to be communicated. So
Yeah, it's not, I mean,
interesting times for
I
sure.
mean, it's a lot of it's needed on these like super technical buildings because
Hmm.
I know lots of architects that they're working on residential houses and they only have a few sheets to their sets, and if you're working with like small scale and contractors, you can work at that level of detail where it's like a small amount of sheets, but yeah, when you
Yeah.
get into the mega size, it's just uh,
Thousands of
in order
feet
to
of
provide
sheets.
the level
Yeah.
of communication that's needed, it's hard to know where how you would unravel that to have less.
Well, and a lot of those drawings are just CYA,
Yeah,
right? They're just there just to justify something,
yeah,
right? No one's ever going to look at them,
yeah.
but they're there just in case. Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's been a fun conversation, Matt. I think this is the exactly the kind of conversation I was hoping to have with you, and I'm glad that you were up for it. So, thanks for doing this. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been really enjoyable. Thanks.
Thanks to our sponsors, and thanks to our members this week. Find out how you can become a member at trxl.co, and I'll talk to you again next week.